It's Larry the GM here, and I just wanted to record a little video. I know the game's going to start here in about 18 minutes, so hopefully we can get this in and done before that. If not, I'll catch up to the game and in progress. But I wanted to run through a little, and I'll add this video into the Brantley's Impact article. Okay, number one, I know this article is significant data overload. And so I tried to focus it into the impact side of that. But I, I don't blame you if you got Larry, man, this has got too much data. All right. So before we get started, let's talk about a couple things you can do to help old Larry the GM out. If you'll please like this video on the YouTube channel, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel on the YouTube side. Subscribe to the site. You can do that through the public page. And better yet, and if you really want to make an impact for the Larry the GM website, subscribe to the Patreon group. And folks, that'll make a big impact, help us increase our footprint, increase our exposure, get some more folks engaged with the site. All right, so here we go. Let's talk about Michael Brantley's impact. And one of the things I wanted to do is help folks understand where this offense has been this season, and kind of walk through like how are we doing month by month. Because I think it's important to understand Michael Brantley is not walking into the offense that he would have walked into in May, for instance, when this team was really, really struggling to score some runs. Uh, August has been a great month. They've averaged 5.7. They've been averaging 6 runs per game. Um, and the models I have would say that they would have been predicted to have about 5.7 runs per game. So the models, I have a regression model that kind of tracks it per month, and you can see that data. I'll show it to you here. This is the actual data, and here's the model data. So you can see how close the model tracks, and we're using the WRC plus, and we're also looking at the XWOBA data to calculate what that model data should be, or what the model would predict for runs. So if we look at it versus lefties, you can see that um, for the lefties, I did use the plate appearances to do a pseudo split of the number of games. So by the number of um, plate appearances, the percentage of the plate appearances, I divided the game. So there's been 33% plate appearances in August. Take the 26 games and have 33% of the games be against versus left-handed pitching. And so you can see the runs that have been scored. They are scoring runs off of lefties at a phenomenal 7.8 clip of the pseudo game. So what that's saying is that when the left-handed starters are in, or when the left-handed relief pitchers are in, this team is raking on them. And that shows up in this WRC plus of 177, expected WOBA of 363. Those are really high numbers, guys. This team is doing great against lefties. Well, Michael Brantley's not really going to help with lefty pitching, right? I mean, he's a lefty too. 90's not bad versus lefties, although in 21 he did have some challenges. Um, so he would be expected to help on the right-handed pitching side. So in the month of August, we're doing fine. We're not doing terrible against righties, but you can see that there's a pretty big difference between the runs scored versus the lefties versus the righties. All right, so that's how you can look at that table. Spend some time with that table. You can see kind of how where we've been the journey through the year, and you can see that there's an opportunity for Michael Brantley to have an impact versus right-handed pitching. All right, this is what I think Dusty's lineups are going to be. Now, this is not exactly the lineup he's using tonight versus a right-handed pitcher. He's Because we have JP Franson, he's actually using Diaz as a catcher, which is good. That's what the optimal models would say. And then I talked about that today in the video and in the article about today's lineup. But this is what I expect the lineups are generally going to be. And I think that Dusty, I don't know yet, and we'll see in a week or two how much flux there's going to be in this lineup, or if this maybe this would be more framing of this is what Dusty will generally do in the postseason as far as a lineup. But there you have the lineups, um, and I'll come back to that later. Okay, now these data tables are a lot of data here. The table to the left is is what the optimal lineups would look like for, in this case, first the lefties, before Brantley, and then after Brantley. So before Brantley, if we utilize the optimal lineup every night, this is the same analysis we've been doing day by day for, I guess, about 2 weeks now. Uh, they should be able to get a 373. Now this is against a standard pitcher that I called 60% fastballs, 30% breaking pitches, and 10% off speed. And then I just use that as a standard. That's I haven't. I can go probably back to my pivot table and see if that's true league wide, but that's that's generally where a lot of the pitchers the Astros have been facing are have been. If you summed up and averaged them all, they'd be about that. You notice that after Brantley, even the expected WOBA is 373 before, but the WOBA is 373 after. Not much difference. In fact, there's only a little bit of difference down here versus off-speed dominant pitchers, and that's because Michael Brantley versus a lefty would not be in the mix for an optimal usage for an optimal lineup. Well, of course, then it's going to be the same before and after, right? He is in the lineup versus an off-speed dominant pitcher. All right, so same thing with the righties, and you look at the optimal lineup, which in my case doesn't have Maldonado in any one of those options, because Maldonado's not a very he's a terrible hitter versus right-handed pitching this year. So the expected WOBA of the lineup that includes these players, top 9 players in it, and the players I list down here in the order as 1 through 9, has a 366. With Michael Brantley, because Michael Brantley would be in that lineup, you can see here he's in the lineup for all 3 cases. The expected WOBA runs up to 375. So you can see that actually when this lineup's right and we utilize the optimal lineup, we can get a 373 lineup with Brantley here and a 375 lineup with righties. That was pretty surprising to me that I could optimize the lineup to actually be better with a right-handed pitcher on the mound versus left-handed, and that's the value of Michael Brantley. Okay, so that moving from 366 to 375 is worth about 0.3 runs per game. So now the challenge is that won't be the lineup Dusty will use most of the time. The optimal lineup Dusty will use with Maldi versus a right-handed pitcher with Maldi in at catcher. So constraining it with Maldi in at catcher, I am able to use Diaz in one of those permutations on the off-speed dominant here shows up there, but also realizing what Dusty's going to be committed to using Abreu. Well, actually, no, I don't have him showing Abreu, but I basically have the optimum pitch with optimum lineup, which is the righty, which includes Singleton. You would be at basically at about a 360 expected WOBA. Okay, so what that means is versus this model 375 drops down to 360 with the one insertion of Maldonado in a catcher. That's how to read that. That's a big change. We'll get into the numbers in a minute. All right, so this is the way the 2 data sets look, and you can see, all right, this is the fastball pitchers, breaking off-speed pitchers, and then what the total would be of these players versus that 60-30-10 pitcher. and you can see what their projected WRC plus would be. And a team full of last year I wrote I guess the year before that I wrote an article about a team full of those players. You can see a team full of these players, how many runs they would score. Maybe that's a fun way to look at it. So you can see the data there, and one of the things to focus on is this data below on the bottom here. So projected before Brantley, 373, 6.4 runs per game. After Brantley, 6.4 runs per game. No change. So far this year, the model would have said they would have had 5.3 runs per game. I'm just trying to be consistent. In August, the model would have said 6.1 runs per game. So there you can see that was for the lefties versus a left-handed starting pitcher versus a righty. 6.2 runs per game, up to 6.5. We're going to score more runs. Then if you insert Maldi, you're giving up half a run from the optimal. So 6.0 runs for 4.9, and August 5.5. What this is telling us is we utilize the right lineup, and having Brantley in helps. We're going to do better. We're going to score more runs. Okay, it's just but it gives you an idea of the magnitudes. And here's that data in a more simplified version. You can kind of see where we've really been. So versus where we've actually been in August versus where we could be in the model. So what this said is adding Brantley adds between 0.2 and 0.4 runs per game versus a right-handed starting pitcher. Okay, it's not insignificant, but it's probably not as much as you might thought. So that's the system that's all we got there. All right, like I said, warning, Dusty's probably not going to use those optimal lineups. So what would his lineups actually be? The lineups I showed you at the beginning of this article. Well, his lineup versus lefties would project to have a 354 expected WOBA, and his lineup versus the righties 344, significantly lower than the numbers I just talked about. So what this means is year to date we've been at 5.3, 4.9. Dusty's lineups would project to be a 5.8 and a 5.5. Obviously better than we have been because we got more healthy, good players. We're not, we don't have Altuve and we don't have Alvarez on the injured list. Optimally, after Brantley, we should be able to get to 6.4 and 6.5. So we are giving up. If we assume that Molinado is in that right-handed pitcher lineup, and we are giving up a run per game. And if we assume some of the other gaps here versus the optimal that's up here, we're giving up 0.6 runs per game. So guys, that's we're giving up that's a significant amount of runs. 0.6 to 1.0 run per game because we're not being optimal with the lineup. This is why data nerds like me get very frustrated with some of the lineups that the Astros have. All right. Now you can see that in August we've been we're producing really well versus the optimal, because as you guys can as you've tracked the daily articles I have, that the scores have been really high because versus the lefty we've used we're using Molinado versus lefty is fine, and we've had some really good lineups. All right, so I do want to have a few disclaimers. The data set for some of the players don't have sufficient data, and a lot of times I've got that in red font. I don't know if this shows up in this version. Yeah, you can see like Singleton. I'm a little concerned about the data there, so I'm putting pseudo data in. Kessinger, I got pseudo data in there. For Brantley, I'm using. You say, well, how did you do any data for Brantley? Well, for Brantley, I'm using his expected WOBA from 21 and 22 average of that. The other thing I'll say is the Astros again are telling us by their actions of putting Abreu in the 5 hole like tonight. The biggest challenge we've had for Jose Abreu this year, you can see it right here, is this data versus right-handed pitchers is atrocious versus breaking and off-speed pitchers. So if Jose Abreu is fixed. And it looked like last night he was tracking the slider way better than I've seen him do it all year long. So if his eyesight's better, if his back's, maybe it's his back something, I don't really understand how his back would impact that. But I'm just telling you, the guy looks way better against the slider. Look for it tonight versus Bayo. How does he look against Bayo's changeup? That's another way to track it. So, um, yeah. So Jose Abreu again, really bad against sliders from the lefties, breaking pitches from the left-handed pitchers as well. So that's a really exciting data point we had last night versus the slider. Look for that some more from Jose Abreu. And so I'll say, if Jose Abreu is a different batter now than he was all season long, then my data is going to need time to catch up to that, and may not even catch up to it by the end of the season. So we're gonna have to. I'm going to start looking at the data slice for the 2-3 weeks. By the end of the season, I'm going to look at the last, I guess it'll be 5 weeks of data related to Jose Abreu. Is something fundamentally different about his ex-woven data from when he came back to the end of the season? And if so, we may look at that. All right, so guys, there you go. That's this Brantley article. You got Brantley and a bunch of stuff added to it. So it's really going to be interesting. What Brantley's impact on this offense could be really interesting, and we'll see. I would tend to believe that the Astros should, based on how much challenge Brantley has had in the second half of the 21 season, I would be really careful with him versus too many lefties. But we shall see. All right, guys. Let you get to the game, but thanks for joining, and I'll post this into the article again. I do ask you like the video, subscribe to the website, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the website, and also please join me in the Patreon group. You can find the links to the Patreon group and just about every article on the site. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. Bye bye.